Hi, guys, and welcome to day 2 of America at War's World War II notes. So, today we're going to skip down to about, well, at least on mine, it's slide 45, but we're looking for the slide that looks like this with the Eastern Front on it. And let's talk a little bit about some of the battles that were on this side of the war. We don't talk about that always in America. So, I wanted to just point out to you notice how far the Germans invaded the Soviet Union at this time. And then you'll see that eventually the Russians push back in 43 and they push them back to here. And then in 44, they finally push them back over the border there. Okay. All right. So you've probably heard of the Battle of Stalingrad if you've seen Enemy at the Gates or the movie Stalingrad, both really good ones for extra credit. I'd highly recommend it. But take a look at where Stalingrad is located. So again, notice how far in the Germans were in their home territory. It was, by the way, if you look at our notes below, it was later named Volgograd. Oh, we can't see this. Let me move my stuff. It was later named Volgograd in order to forget Stalin's brutal time in power, because obviously Stalingrad is named after Joseph Stalin. Okay? All right. So let's learn a little bit about Stalingrad with some of our details. All right. So first of all, you need to understand that basically the Germans took the city of Stalingrad. And so this is a siege, and the Soviets are trying to take the city back. It's a very important city for a lot of reasons. Number one, it has an important river, the Volga River next to it. It has numerous railways going through that city, and a bunch of cities kind of it's used as a hub. So it's very important for transportation and supplies and all of that. But they basically battle this, you'll notice, from August of 42 into 43. This isn't just like a 1 or 2 day battle. It's nasty. It is the bloodiest standoff on the war, over 1 million casualties in 199 days. That is insane. It is considered the turning point in the war on the Eastern Front. This is where finally the Russians start pushing the Germans out of their homeland. So that's considered that point. As we said, it's a Russian victory eventually after a lot of deaths. And if you've seen either of those movies, you know what we're talking about. The Allies basically decided to let Russia fight on their own over there. And it will later cost our relationships with the Soviets. It kind of leads us into the Cold War. You know, World War I was the start to that. And this just makes it worse because they are dying by the millions, literally millions, and they need help. So if you'll take a look at the numbers up here, again, I don't need you to remember those numbers or memorize them, but it helps us get that overall picture. If you look at the Germans, we're talking 750,000 killed, wounded, or captured. The Soviets, who ended up taking the city, ended up with over 1 million killed, wounded, or captured. Here's some pictures just showing you the conditions in Stalingrad. Of course, those are Russian soldiers trying to take back their city. And this, I thought, was a really interesting picture down below. 91,000 German troops surrender at Stalingrad. How scary is this? Less than 6,000 of them survived the Soviet camps by the 1950s. So to end up in a Soviet camp was a really bad thing. But you also have to remember that the Germans did horrible things to the Soviets as they entered their country as well. Another big battle on this side is the Battle of Kursk. Let me move my picture so you can kind of see it right there. Okay. The Soviets battled the Germans at the city of Kursk from July to August of 1943. The German goal, they wanted to win. So some Allied forces actually wanted to quit, but they needed this win. And they also wanted to capture Russian POWs so that they could work for the war effort to help them out. Of course, they always need supplies. So that was kind of the German goal. Oops. So some things about this battle at Kursk. Soviet intelligence knew about the attack, actually, which gave them time to build 300 kilometers of deep defensive lines, which really helped them. The Germans also had a new weapon. They used these new power tanks that they had created. These are the new Panther and larger Tiger tanks. Eventually, it is a Soviet victory. It is the first time a German offense had been halted by the Soviets. So that's kind of why this is an important battle on that side of the war. Again, take a look at your numbers over here. When we're talking about numbers, we've got, 900,000 men, 3,000 tanks, 9,000 guns and mortars, 2 million, men, 7,000 tanks, 47,000 guns and mortars. Take a look at the aircrafts. We're talking over 2,000 aircrafts, 2,000 to 3,000 aircrafts. Just crazy. And the number of deaths missing in action, 198,000 missing in action, killed in action, or wounded in action. Craziness for the Germans. 254,000 killed, missing, or captured on the Russian side. Just incredible, the numbers. So while we're talking about tanks, let's look at some tanks, okay? So you probably recognize some of these. This one over here would be the German Panther. It stands for the Panzer V Panther. It's the largest of all the German tanks that we'll talk about. It has that nice sloping armor, which helps avoid like grenades from sticking to the sides or getting caught. It has a nice wide track, so it's not easy to tip over, and a very strong engine. Its weakness is its side armor. So if you wanted to take this tank out, you needed to get to the side somehow, which isn't always easy to do. This is the German Tiger. It is short for the Panzer VI Tiger. It is the heaviest of all the German tanks. The rear armor plate is its only weakness. So imagine that. You've got to get around behind them in order to take this tank out, which is very difficult. By the way, it carries an 88 millimeter gun on it. Over on the right-hand side, this is the Soviet T-34 tank. We will see those in the Korean War as well, because the Soviets give these to the North Koreans. So they'll be used again later. It is a medium-sized tank, but it is the most produced tank in World War II. Its sloping armor makes it very difficult to penetrate. And I'll tell you straight, the German tanks were so tough. Their exterior was so tough, our stuff would just kind of bounce off the outside. So it was very difficult to penetrate their armor. And of course, down here we have the U.S. Sherman. This is named after General William Tecumseh Sherman of the Civil War for being so darn tough, of course. The Panzer could punch a hole right through the armor of our tank, but it was lighter and it was cheaper, so we had a lot more of them. All of the Allies used this tank. The French, the English, was the best of all the tanks that we had. Now, if you get a chance, I'd really recommend that you take a look at this link. I know it may not work on our school computers, but if you've seen the movie Fury, has a lot of swearing and stuff in it, but it does show you how really, truly tough it was to take out those German tanks, and it shows, combat from tank to tank. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the Pacific Theater a little bit. First of all, our movie, The Pacific, has really done a nice job. Each episode was showing how much of the Pacific Ocean the Japanese controlled. They basically controlled all of this part of the Pacific. They attacked us in Pearl Harbor over here in Hawaii. And of course, we also had some important battles over here at Midway. But they controlled any islands within this red area. So they controlled the ocean. And if you remember, Pearl Harbor was a coordinated attack where they attacked Guam, they attacked Saipan and the Marshall Islands all at the same time. And even the Aleutian Islands up here in Alaska, which a lot of people forget about. Okay? All right, so we'll point out some things here. Notice the Philippines, very important as a stepping stone to try to get to Japan if we're trying to attack. Okay, so first of all, what was our role in the Pacific Theater? First of all, our goal was to have a defensive play because we were dealing with Hitler first. So we decided we were going to try to take out Europe first and then deal with Japan. But it didn't work that way because basically we got attacked at Pearl Harbor and we had to do something. Remember, Japan had taken over Guam, Wake Island, Singapore, and the Philippines. So the question is, how do we get them back? So we had two main goals of the U.S. in the Pacific. Number one, to regain the Philippines that we just talked about and to actually invade homeland Japan. So the U.S. began a policy they called island hopping, and it's exactly like it sounds. We're basically taking island by island, working our way across, kind of like a U shaped here, like that, to work our way up to Japan as stepping stones towards Japan. Unfortunately, it didn't quite go that very well. Number one, they had tunnels built in all of these islands. So when we would send in our fire from our ships and our planes, we really weren't hitting a lot of the enemy. So our guys were getting crushed when they walked in on that island on the beach. And it was just slow. It was really slow for us to get all the way up there to get near Japan. They were tenacious fighters. This is something that really changed things with island hopping. And this is the Doolittle Raid or the Tokyo Raid. A lot of people don't always talk about this, but it really made a difference. And so historians are studying it more. If you've seen the movie Pearl Harbor, you've seen this scene. Took place in Tokyo, Japan in April of 1942. The U.S. purpose was to basically take the war home to the Japanese people so that they would write to their loved ones and say, hey, we need you at home. Quit fighting out in these other places. So basically, here's what happened. Lieutenant Doolittle and his pilots kept working on finding a way. Remember, we had that aircraft carrier I showed you last time, and we could get our fighter planes off of there. But we couldn't get bomber planes off of there because they were so heavy and slow that we couldn't get a good runway. Well, they stripped those things down to nothing. And finally, Doolittle's crew was successful in using those bombers to actually take off the aircraft carriers. So what does that mean now? Instead of taking island by island to get near Japan, to actually bomb Japan, now we can just set our nice little aircraft carrier right here and we can bomb wherever we want to go. So it really changed our focus a little bit. If you go to this link here, this is a clip of the Doolittle Raid from the movie Pearl Harbor. So you can check that out on YouTube. Let's take a look at our numbers. Unfortunately, the Japanese discovered our aircraft carrier before we wanted them to. Well, we'd never want them to find our aircraft carrier, but so our pilots had to take off before they were supposed to, which means they didn't have enough gas to return. It was a one-way trip anyway, but so they were told they were supposed to land in China and speak Chinese and basically say, I am an American, and hope that they can find some friendlies there that'll take them back to their people. But remember, the Japanese have invaded China, so it was a very dangerous raid. You'll see there were 16 B-25s, 80 airmen, and if you look at it, they did succeed in bombing Tokyo, absolutely. In fact, you'll see in this picture right here, they actually attached the peace medals that Japan gave the United States while we were having peace talks as they attacked Pearl Harbor. So they attached these and dropped them on Tokyo as a little, revenge, I guess. Notice not all of our airmen made it to China or succeeded in China. 3 of them ended up dead. 8 became POWs. Now, sadly, 4 of those POWs died in captivity. 3 were executed, and 1 died by disease while they were POWs. And 15 of the 16 B-25s were destroyed. Some of them ended in the water. Some of them were captured. So very sad. Now, again, look at the casualties on the other side. They don't know exactly how many people they hit. They were bombing a factory in Tokyo in particular, but they definitely hit the target that they were looking for. The next battle in the Pacific I wanted to talk to you about was the Battle of the Coral Sea. This is in May of 1942. Again, it's earlier in the war yet. We have Admiral Fletcher, United States guy, versus Takagi from Japan. And Japan's goal in this particular movement was to take Australia. Remember, Australia is fighting with the Allies on our side. This battle, Japan loses, and Japanese naval aviation begins to start that decline after this particular attack. And you'll see all the movements here that are happening in the Coral Sea. If you take a look at some of the numbers, here's some pictures from the Battle at the Coral Sea. 2 fleet carriers, 9 cruisers, 13 destroyers. If you look at the other side, the Japanese side, 2 fleet carriers, 1 light carrier, 9 cruisers. Take a look at the ones that were destroyed. We had 1 fleet carrier scuttled, 1 destroyer sunk, etc. 600 some killed, 69 aircraft destroyed. They had 1 light carrier sunk, 1 destroyer, 1 fleet carrier, 3 small warships, 92 aircraft destroyed, etc. Our next battle is the Battle of Midway. And obviously, you know of the island Midway. It's midway across the ocean, so it's pretty easy to pick out on your test. But this fight was not on the island itself. This was a naval and air battle. So it was near Midway Island from June 4th through the 7th of 42. The purpose, Japan was trying to take Midway as a defensive position and also to basically work its way to attack the United States eventually. Now, luckily, here's what happened. U.S. code breakers find out where they're going to be. Now, can you imagine trying to find a ship like a needle in a haystack in this whole entire ocean? So it was very lucky that they figured this out. It gave the U.S. an advantage. It was an air and sea battle, as I said. And if you haven't seen the movie Midway, I would so recommend it. It's a great one. You'll like it, and it's good for extra credit. It's Admiral Nimitz in the U.S. versus Admiral Yamamoto of Japan. Interestingly, the Japanese ships are the same ones that attacked Pearl Harbor. So it was a very personal attack to some of these boys. We basically take out 4 out of 5 of the Japanese carriers in this battle. It is beginning of the end for Japan's Navy. Basically limited Japan's ability to attack Hawaii again or other allied positions. To give you a little idea, Japan's Navy had not been defeated since 1863. So they had a reason to be confident and a little cocky. It is considered the turning point in the Pacific. As I said, this is where Japan basically goes on the defensive. They don't have carriers. They don't have time to build them. So they basically take their planes and their ships and they pull back and try to protect Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and then eventually they just basically protect the homeland of Japan. And Iwo Jima is sitting out there like a sore thumb. Here are some of the numbers of the Battle of Midway. Now, I will point out to you, we did have a U.S. carrier sunk, which was horrible, but they had 4. So it just shows you what a big difference this made. 150 aircraft destroyed on the U.S. side, 307 killed. Take a look at this. 248 Japanese aircraft destroyed, over 3,000 people killed on the Japanese side. Our next battle in Pacific is Operation Watchtower. That was the code name, and it's at Guadalcanal. You saw this in our first episodes in the Pacific, so you kind of have an idea of what it was like. And you'll see that it was an attack right here on these beaches right there. It took place August of 42 to February of 43, 6 months long. So this was a brutal battle. It's in the Solomon Islands. So we fought not just on Guadalcanal, but also in Tulagi and Florida as well. It's the U.S., New Zealand, and Australia and Britain versus the Japanese. The purpose of this battle is for the Allies to cut off the Japanese supply lines so that they can't go any further, and to use this as a military base from which to counterattack the Japanese. And if you see where it is down here, remember, we're working our way this way up to the Philippines to get up to Japan right here. Okay? It's General Halsey of the U.S. versus Yamamoto in Japan. It is the beginning of an Allied offense in the Pacific. By this time now, we've at least replaced a lot of the ships or fixed a lot of the ships that were damaged at Pearl Harbor. This is not a water battle. This is a beach amphibious attack on the island. This is where the soldiers really experienced jungle living for the first time in the Pacific, and horrible conditions, and they see how really brutal their enemy is. If you remember the scenes in the Pacific of just like wave after wave of these Japanese soldiers coming at them, and they just don't stop. Our boys were known as the heroes of the Holocaust for fighting on Guadalcanal. That was the headline at home. It was eventually an Allied victory after 6 months. And again, take a look at the number of forces we've got here. Basically, the Japanese were outnumbered 2-1, but they also have these tunnels and hit and run tactics. The U.S., our allies, had 7,000 some dead. They had 31,000 dead, 1,000 captured, etc. So the next battle we talked about in our movie is Peleliu. Today it's known as Palau, in case you're wondering, and it's right here next to the Philippines. This went on from September through November of 1944. This is General Rupertus of the U.S. versus Nakagawa in Japan. The goal, of course, in Peleliu, if you remember, was to capture the airfield. Yes, you remember. It was the 1st Marines and the Army's 81st Infantry that fought on this island. They worked I wouldn't say that. Yes, they worked together, kind of separately. This is where the boys start questioning the value of an island versus casualties, because they kept seeing their friends die. And I mean, most people haven't even heard of this island. Is it even an important island in the future? Which it wasn't. They never even used Peleliu. So all these guys end up dying for this cause. And what is it really for? It was predicted they would only take 4 days to take Peleliu, and it took 2 months because the Japanese were very well fortified and they were waiting and they were ready. It was an Allied victory, as we said, after a long haul. Just some things to look at. Here's a Japanese fortification. So you notice they're really built into the caves here. They've got their pillboxes up on the beach, which is very difficult. Over here we have the Navajo code talkers. I don't know if you've read about that or heard about that, but we actually used the Navajo Indians to do our code, and the Japanese had a horrible time trying to break that code. They just could not figure it out. It's a very difficult language to understand. So take a look at the strength. U.S. had 47,500 some troops on Peleliu. Japan had 13,600. So honestly, it was just a matter of time, but it was brutal because they were very dedicated. Take a look at the casualties. 1,500 killed, 6,000 some wounded, 36 missing. The Marine Division had 1,300 killed, 5,400 some wounded, 36 missing. The 81st Infantry is below that. And then look over here. You've got 10,900 killed on the Japanese side, 202 captured. Basically, almost everybody. All right. I believe we were just on this part 8 of our series, where you see the boys attacking Iwo Jima. It was codenamed Operation Detachment. Iwo Jima actually means Sulphur Island. This island was known for its black sand and its smell. They said it smelled like eggs, and that's because of you guessed it, the sulfur. You're right. Another brutal attack from February through March of 1945. This is Smith and Nimitz versus Kuribayashi. It is a U.S. naval bombardment. They just bombed the crap out of the island, and then a land attack with air support. Now, notice where Iwo Jima is and why it's so brutal. I mean, this is a stepping stone to Japan. We could bomb Japan from here, so they were not going to lose this at any cost. Sadly, if you watch, there's a couple of movies I'd recommend, Flag of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. I'd recommend you watch both of them. Watch Flag of Our Fathers first. Both were done by Clint Eastwood, and it's awesome because it shows this battle from the U.S. perspective and then from the Japanese perspective. In Letters from Iwo Jima, I mean, the Japanese general, he knew they were going to die. He had been told that they couldn't have any air support or any help, just try to hold them off, because they were keeping everything to protect homeland Japan by this point. Kind of sad when you look at it. The U.S. goal was to take this island and its 3 airfields so they could bomb Japan. This is some of the fiercest and bloodiest fighting in the Pacific. Of course, the Japanese had tunnels all over this island. They had fought on this island against other invaders, so they've been there for years. It was an Allied victory, but this is the first battle where Allied deaths actually outnumbered Japanese deaths, if you can imagine. So if you'll take a look, these are our strengths. 70,000 U.S. troops, 500 some ships. They had 22,000. Look how they're outnumbered. And then take a look. Basically, all casualties. We had 6,800 killed, 2 captured but recovered, 19,000 guys wounded. Horrible stuff. Here's the movies I was talking about right here. Some things to know. First of all, here's an interesting story. Archaeologists found letters buried in these tunnels on Iwo Jima, and many of them were saying goodbye before they killed themselves. These guys would hear these explosions down in the caves, and they would later go in there and they would find that each of them had taken a grenade right in their belly right here and pulled the pin and killed themselves rather than surrender. So they wrote goodbye letters because they knew they were going to die. This is a really famous picture. You've probably seen it before. This was on every newspaper you could imagine back home, and it was depicting 5 United States Marines and a U.S. Navy corpsman raising the flag on Mount Suribachi during the Battle of Iwo Jima. The story at home was this was us winning the battle at Iwo Jima, that we were winning the war in the Pacific. The truth is all of those guys will die except one. And 2 of them will die right on Iwo Jima after they raise this flag. So this was not the final battle. Unfortunately, they would think they would take this area, like we've talked about, and then all of a sudden someone's shooting from behind because of all those tunnels. So it was a very difficult island to clear. The next one you'll see in episode 9 of the Pacific is Okinawa. Operation Iceberg was the code name. And take a look where Okinawa is. You think Iwo Jima was tough. Okinawa was even worse. This is from April to June of 45. It is the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific, coming on the beach. The U.S. goal was to use this as a base to attack mainland Japan, and it is right there next to it. So it was called the Typhoon of Steel for all the kamikaze attacks on ships and tanks that they used. This is our first experience with civilians caught in the crossfire in the Pacific. In Europe, they had seen some of that, but this is bad. They're on this island and they're getting killed in the crossfire between the two. It is an Allied victory, but horrible, horrible casualties and a very low point in the war for a lot of the men. Take a look at the strength. 541,000 in the 10th Army, 183 combat troops, and eventually we sent in over 250,000. The Japanese were outnumbered, greatly outnumbered, and they also forced the Okinawan people to fight with them. You'll see here a child that's been caught in the crossfire. Take a look at some of the casualties and losses here. Just insane. Estimates are insane. All right, we've got a few new pieces of transportation in World War II. This one right here is called the LCVP, or Higgins boat. It was also nicknamed a duck because you could do it on land or on sea. Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us, said President Eisenhower. Higgins is the guy that actually invented this piece of machinery. He added the drop ramp on the front compared to the British design that did not have that. They had to crawl over. This is what we used on D-Day, Iwo Jima, and you probably remember some of the scenes from Saving Private Ryan as they open this gate with machine guns and stuff. Very difficult. This is my favorite. As you know, I'm a Jeep lover. I have a Jeep. I've had a Jeep for a long time. This is where we use Jeeps in war. Most of the time it was a reconnaissance vehicle spying on the enemy. It was capable of about 660-pound payload. It was used to ferry the wounded. As you can see right here, they put them on the front. And also it served as a pickup truck, and it doubled as a limo for generals and heads of state as they moved from one place to another in the war. All right, let's talk about weapons before we end for today. You probably have heard World War II vets talk about those 88s. Man, those 88s. The sound of them just brings chills to them. They also had 105s. Those are different German cannons, and the name of it stands for the diameter of their barrel. So an 88 would be the diameter of the barrel. Here you've got a 60 millimeter M2 mortar. So this, you drop your little grenade looking thing in there, and it makes this thunk sound, and it shoots wherever you want it to go within reason. It's a shorter distance. This is a 30 cal, stands for a Browning 30 caliber machine gun. It's designed for mobile offense. They also used a 50 cal as well. Down here, you've got a bazooka. This is one of the first anti-tank weapons used. Germans copied this immediately. And funny, it was named after a musical instrument that looks very similar to this. All right, let's see how many of these you recognize. A lot of people in class did. So our first one up top, that's the Colt. You got it. This was a standard issue semi-automatic U.S. handgun from 1911 all the way to 1985. So most of our officers had one of those for sure. How about this one? This is the M1 Garand. It's a U.S. semi-automatic rifle. It held an 8-round clip. The drawback, the auto eject clip would make a ping noise, which obviously you don't want to make a lot of noise while you're out there. How about this one? Oh, let me move it so you can see it here. This is the M1 carbine. You're right. It was preferred by U.S. paratroopers because obviously it was light and it folded. And as you're jumping out of airplanes, you want a gun that's light and easy to hold. So good. How about this one over here? This is the German Luger. You got it. This is a standard semi-automatic pistol that the German soldiers had, officers. Many Allied soldiers brought these back as a symbol of Nazi Germany or sold them for money as well. How about this one down here? This is the Karabiner 98K. This is the primary German bolt-action rifle that they used. It only held 5 rounds in its clip, so ours was a little better with 8. It had a range of about 800 meters, just to give you an idea. Okay, let's go to our next slide. Oops. Get rid of those. There we go. All right, what does this one look like to you? You probably saw this in the 1920s even. This is the Thompson U.S. submachine gun, or the Tommy gun. It's easy to identify because of its round clip here, right? Okay, how about this one? I know a lot of you know these because of your video games. This is the Bren. This is a British machine gun. It had 500 RPM. It's less than the Germans. Only used the box or drum magazines instead of the belt because it was slower. So just a little bit about that. How about this weird looking one? Yep, again, I'm going to have to exit to show you. This is the Sten. This is the cheapest British machine gun that there was. It was kind of inaccurate, but preparing for Nazi takeover, they needed guns quick and fast, so they could produce these very quickly. So at least they had guns. Okay, how about this one over here? This is basically the MP40 German submachine gun. And the last one over here, the MG34 or an MG42. These were called Hitler's buzzsaw. They were considered the best machine gun. They made about a 1,200 to 1,800 round clip per minute, which is a lot of bullets in a short amount of time. Okay, I think we're going to stop at this point, and we'll start again tomorrow with round 3. Have a great day. See you later.